I do want to talk to you for a few moments about the life of Elijah and his assistant, Elisha. And it brings to mind just the whole idea of the power of mentors. Here's a couple of facts about Elijah. First of all, I think he was really a rock star prophet in the sense of the miracles that God did through Elijah were unbelievable. Like, it's one thing to see a healing, which that's unbelievable. That's fantastic. It's another thing to see like a heavenly wonder. You know, many, many times Elijah would call fire down from heaven and fire comes down and 50 people are gone. 50 of the enemies of God. Many times. He was obviously taken to heaven in chariots of fire. So you see fire, the fire of God, this amazing response of God's holy character coming down upon his enemies. And so Elijah was used that way many, many times. He's done many other miracles. Now, I think this whole idea of fire really draws me because when I was younger, I was a pyromaniac. I have to admit. I hate to admit this. And I know I'm the only one here. I know no other man in this auditorium ever liked playing with fire. Probably the only one. A lot of us do, don't we? For an example, when growing up, I used to love to make models. You know, model planes, model trucks, model ships, model cars. And I think my mother and father, mostly my mother, watched me build these and was just very excited to see me, you know, my dream of seeing all these models made and completed and looking awesome. And I paint them, spray paint them, whole thing, sand them down. You know, we'll go buy a model that's got that fake color on it. You got to paint it to make it look really, really good. And so I think she was thinking, hey, this is what he wants. But see, that was just to get me to the point where I could now burn them. Light one on fire, another one on fire. Now I have a whole scene of fire going on. That's what I liked about models. You probably think I've got a very destructive personality. I really don't. I've grown up, I've matured now. But I can relate to a guy that likes fire. And I don't know if that's what it was really about with Elijah. I know we're talking about a different type of fire, the fire of God. And it truly, to me, is amazing that God used him like this. And you see, Elijah had really bad enemies. He had probably the most wicked couple that ever lived, Ahab and Jezebel, were his enemies. He had to deal with these two people. I mean, they loved killing people just for their spare time, enjoyment. And they hated him. They tried to kill him, but God was faithful, and Elijah survived, and they did not. So there's no one, Jesus even said in the New Testament, no one was greater than Elijah. So this is an amazing, amazing prophet, an amazing person. If I'm thinking about anybody I'd want to be my mentor, I think that'd be like for me, shooting really too high. I would aim for somebody kind of in the middle, not as prominent, but Elijah couldn't live forever. He knew his time was coming to an end, as great as his ministry was, as great as he was. He knew he needed a replacement, which all great leaders do. They look for their replacement. Who's going to take my place? Who's going to continue on the work? Because they are responsible, and that's why they even would think of such a thing. And he prays, and he feels like God says, anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Meholah, to succeed you as prophet. So he comes to find this Elisha. And in 1 Kings 19, we have a story here. I'm just going to read a couple of verses. The call of Elisha. So Elijah went from where he was and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, which to me isn't the first thing you'd think. The guy that's going to take up Elijah's work, that's what he's doing. He's plowing oxen. He himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him, which in the Old Testament meant not, gee, you look cold, I think I'll let you warm up a little bit. It means you're going to be the guy that's taking my place when you put a coat on somebody, mantle. And he puts that on Elisha. Elisha leaves his oxen and runs after Elijah. Hey, let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I'll come with you. And you see Elijah's reply, oh, go back. What have I done to you? In other words, you just want You're not serious. And a great leader wants people to follow him who are serious. Maybe he thought he made a mistake, Elijah did. Maybe he thought, oh, it's got to be somebody else. This guy doesn't seem ready. But we do see in verse 21 that Elisha leaves them, goes back, takes his yoke of oxen, slaughters them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. He set out to follow Elijah and become his servant. That's pretty amazing. In other words, God was making a promise to Elisha. I think we could say that Elisha knew that God was saying, hey, this is going to happen to you. You're going to take on Elijah's ministry. And it really is exciting to us. You know, it's exciting to him. You're going to take Elijah's place. But then, so that's the first reality. If we look at 6 realities of God making a promise, first of all, he makes the promise. And my first thought to you is, has God ever promised you anything? Ever. And I'm always amazed, people that you'd think, well, boy, this person, they're not, the last thing they care about is God. The last thing they want to live like is a godly person. I mean, their life's a mess, they're wild. And sometimes we misunderstand. We think that God wouldn't speak to them. He maybe wouldn't give a promise to them. But I know many people that actually God promised them something when they were really, really far from him. Like me. You see, I didn't grow up in the church, as Pastor Jim said. I grew up just in a home that was good. We went to church, you could say, but I didn't really know what Jesus was all about or what Christianity was all about. And I was watching this evangelist on television. But see, I was still holding back. And then one night, I went out with some friends. We got really, 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 really messed up. And being very, very silly and doing a lot of bad stuff. And in the middle of that, I see a Gideon Bible. I mean, I saw it. And then I heard God speak to me. And he said, Jeff, if you give your life to me tonight, I'll bless you and I'll give you a life you can't imagine. But if you don't give your life to me now, tonight, you're headed for destruction. And I was immediately sobered. While they're still laughing at me, I stand up. So yes, I was on the ground. I stand up and I said, I got to go home and tell my dad everything I've done this past year. And then I said, what did I just say? And I watched myself go get my stuff. And I went home and I did the same thing I just told those guys. I told my dad, Dad, I got to tell you stuff I've been doing this past year. And I'm like, what am I doing? Well, the Spirit inside of me, or beginning to come inside of me, was at work. And my life radically changed overnight. Overnight. I was stunned at the change, and so was my dad. So was a lot of people. And that's when he made the call. Because he goes, what's the next step? I said, I don't know. I got to find other people that have done the same crazy choice that I'm making that I've never heard anyone want to do before. So God promised me that he was going to bless my life, and I took him up on that. But obviously I was pretty far away from him. We misunderstand, I think. Sometimes we think the closer you are to God, the louder he'll speak. But I think it's the opposite. I think you find in the Bible most often God speaks the loudest to people that are the furthest away. Which really makes sense, doesn't it? Because when you're really in trouble, then God's going to go, hey, that's what you do when you have a kid. Hey, come here, kid. Hey! When they're furthest away. To get their attention. Sometimes we're praying, we're listening for a real loud scream, but maybe the Lord just wants to whisper, I love you. Or maybe he wants to show you through his word. He can speak that way as well. So that's the first reality, that God makes a promise. And it can be anything. You know, for me it was he was going to bless my life. But there's some people here, maybe you feel like God's promised you someday, maybe you're going to have a business and make money, or maybe you're going to be a surgeon at Mayo Clinic, or maybe you're going to be in some other side of the world living, or maybe you're going to be a carpenter. Whatever it is that God's given you, he's given you a promise. And the second thing that happens when God makes a promise is that you can no longer go on living the way you were living before he gave you that promise. Yeah, everybody wants to hear God, but here's the thing. Do you really? Because He's really smart. He knows what he's doing. One of the reasons he gives us a promise is once we embrace it, we now can no longer go living the way we were before. Once I heard God share with me, if you follow me, Jeff, I'm going to give you life you can't imagine. I'll bless you. I could no longer stay where I was at. And that's kind of the genius with God. In verse 21, we see Elisha. He's got this new calling now, this new promise. He takes the yoke of oxen, he slaughters them. He burns the plowing equipment to cook the meat. He gives it to all the people, and they ate. He totally gets rid of his old life. Everything connected to what he did before, he gets rid of. One of the reasons God gives you a promise is because he wants for your life to change. He wants to change your life direction, and he's going to prepare you now to someday experience that reality of that promise. But it's not always right away. Sometimes there's a delay. The third reality of God making a promise is a lot of times there is a delay. If there wasn't, why would he give you the promise? Hey, you're going to have a car. Oh, okay, you got the new car. Hey, you're going to have a wife someday. Oh, well, okay, you got married. He doesn't give you a promise unless it's not going to happen right away. Well, why would he do that? It's interesting that after we see Elisha here follow Elijah in 1 Kings 19, we don't hear from him again for 5 or 6 chapters until actually 2 Kings chapter 2. And so Elijah was doing more amazing stuff, and there's no word of Elisha anywhere. And when I was doing my devotions, I'm like, where's Elisha now? That's the part I wanted to get to. But chapter after chapter, no Elisha. Well, that's the job of an assistant to a ministry that Elijah had, is you're kind of in the background. You're the mentoree. He's the mentor. You follow him quietly. You serve him. You do whatever you can. So he's doing his job, but we don't hear a lot from him because there are delays, setbacks. You have to expect those. If you have a promise from God, expect delays. And it may not be as fast as you want it to be. Maybe it won't be that long, but there is a time of training, time of getting you ready. Like Jesus was tested in the wilderness for a little bit before he did his ministry. Paul was in the desert for years after he knew he was called by God. After his life was changed, you'd think he'd go out and do ministry, but no, God said, no, he went into an actual desert. So we have that time where God might give you a delay, but he's doing things in you, and he's getting you ready. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players that ever lived. We used to say the greatest, but, as time goes on, the new people come around, and people call them the greatest. For a while, when I was a little younger, he was the greatest. But he said this. He said, by failing, not achieving success in my life, I succeeded. By failing, I succeeded. In other words, I wouldn't have succeeded if I didn't keep on failing, because I learned through failure. Failing's not the way to fail. That is the way to success. Can you imagine Thomas Edison creating the light bulb the first time? Hey, I did it. I just guessed right. He had over 1,000 tries, failures. Ravi Zacharias says, having the answers is not essential to living. What is essential is a sense of God's presence during dark seasons of questioning. I'm going to read it one more time because it's kind of deep. Having the answers is not essential to living. What is essential is the sense of God's presence during the dark seasons of questioning. In the middle of the wait, in the middle of your delay, that's when you're going to question. Of course you are. You're going to go, well, I wonder if I heard from God at all. We try everything we can think of sometimes to help God along a little bit, but it'll happen when it's supposed to happen. The fourth reality of a promise God gives you is it does not equal fulfillment. Elisha was anointed to be Elijah's assistant, but he was not anointed yet to actually perform the ministry. He had to understand the promise is not the fulfillment. You don't just because you have a calling, that doesn't mean you're going to have fulfillment of that calling. The Pharisees thought, I have this position, I have this role, and I've got this background, I have all these letters behind my name, therefore I can do this and that. Well, that might work in some things, but with God, position doesn't necessarily mean anything. Many of us at North Central, I went to North Central as well, Bible college, Bible college. I didn't get married there. People say, oh, you didn't get married out of Bible college? No. Well, when did you get married? I didn't get married till I was here, which means I lived 40 years single. And a lot of people say, well, you must not have wanted to be married. That's great. No, I actually wanted to be married very much. Oh. I think sometimes we have a hard time understanding, why would God give someone a desire or a dream or a promise for something and then wait so long? I'd even have people feel sorry for me. But I made a decision when I was 30. I decided, I'm not going to wait forever and just sit around and wait to get married and then do what God's calling me to do. I'm going to do what God's calling me to do now, and if I get married, great, and if I don't, because, see, the wait changes you a little bit. The delay refocuses your love on God himself and not the thing that he's promised you. How many of us, at least I'm guilty of this, the thing that I'm promised, I begin to want even more than God sometimes. I don't think that's what's happening, but sometimes that happens. And I think we need to get to the point where we say, okay, I know God's promised this. This is what I'd really love to do someday, but you know what, Lord, I love you so much that, hey, it's okay if you don't do it. That could take 10 minutes to get to. That can take 5 years to get to that place. And then some of us, we have to get to that place again every morning, don't we? I mean, it's great when God gives us a promise for something amazing in our lives. It's great when we get a really amazing dream, like Joseph. I mean, dream that he was going to rule over all his brothers. Too bad he told them that, because then the opposite happened. But that was how God was going to let him have that dream, by the opposite happening. So we've got to really make sure that we understand that we need to be equipped many times to actually fulfill that calling. When I was called into youth ministry, I knew that God was calling me, but I was not equipped at all. And I wanted to get out there right away, and I saw my other friends doing things I wanted to do, getting positions at churches, and I just wasn't. For a couple years, I really didn't get my first youth ministry position. It was very hard for me, but along the way, I realized that, okay, I'll let God work on me, and when I'm ready, I guess he'll release it. That was hard to wait for that. If you feel like God's called you to something great, that's awesome. Take courage that he's got a great plan for you, but don't let that get bigger than him. Keep him your first love, always. And it's the hardest thing to do sometimes, is to keep God our first love, because so many other things we want in our life. And what if we don't get those? I mean, just because we feel like God's promised us something, there are people that feel that God's promised them this and that, and maybe they didn't hear from God. But if God keeps bringing it up, even if you don't think he said it, I find that sometimes he keeps reminding me of certain things. So I know that he's promised. It's just a timing issue. And you know what? If the delay is great, guess what? The fifth reality is, the greater the delay, the greater the glory. If you really wait an extra long time, the glory will only be greater. I mean, Elisha waited a lot for his time. And then we come to this point, very interesting, where they're walking together. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a chariot of fire and horses of fire appears and separates the two of them. Now, that would be even better than the best firework I can ever imagine, is seeing that. Can you imagine a chariots of fire, horses of fire? What is this? It appears and it comes down. And you know, Elisha knew this was going to happen, because we see in verse 9 of 2 Kings chapter 2, right before this happened, Elijah says to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I go?" And Elisha asked, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Verse 10, "You've asked a difficult thing," Elijah said, "yet if you see me when I am taken from you, then you'll get it. Otherwise not. Oh well." And of course he saw the glory of God. Seeing him go up to heaven, I can't imagine that sight. The greater the delay, the greater the glory. I mentioned a month ago about my friends that were great mentors to me. God finally ended my delay of getting into youth ministry, and I ended up accepting a position in Omaha, Nebraska. And I had the pleasure and privilege of working under Ty and Terry Schenzel in our 20s. But Ty was already doing great things, but I turned him down the first time. I wanted to be at a different church. I felt like I was promised this other church by some people and the pastor and the staff there. And so when I graduated from North Central, I knew I was going to this church. And so I said no to Ty, said no to that church in Omaha. 6 months later, that church situation's totally done. They changed their mind. They're not even going to have that position. And now I've got nothing. Seems even more hopeless. Ty calls again. Thank the Lord. And he says, "Jeff, I can't stop thinking about you. Can I send you a document? This is our youth ministry document, and this is what I believe about youth ministry, and just see if we're on the same page at all." And I said, "Sure." So he's going to mail me this document. Meanwhile, I wrote down what I thought my philosophy of youth ministry would be or is. And I remember writing down somewhere, I've got it written down, loving, winning, equipping, and sending. Ty's document comes, I open it up, 100 pages of it. Like, what is going on? But the title is Loving Youth, Winning Youth, Equipping Youth, and Sending Youth. And I went, oh man. I call him up and I said, "Ty, this is crazy. Do you know that I just wrote down that vision statement like a week ago?" He goes, "We got to talk. We got to get together." So I went down to Omaha, and the rest is history. Now, I mentioned to some of you that a couple months ago, unfortunately, my friends Ty and Terry were killed in a tragic car accident. And it was devastating, of course. But even more for me, because he was one of the great mentors in my life. Ty and Terry and I, we didn't just hang out once in a while. I mean, almost everything he did, he wanted me with him. I don't know why. He was always the leader, but he always had me there. And I'll never forget, we did a radio show together that was amazing. And I got so close even to Terry, even more through that than maybe all of the youth ministry stuff. And I say this not to say I'm somebody. I say this to say when Ty called me, I didn't think he was anybody. Because are any of us anybody? We're all equal in God's sight, right? Now there's a street named after him in Omaha. I had no idea who I was following. And I think it's that way a lot. You know, we lift people up. We kind of do that as human beings. But of course, in God's eyes, Elijah, Elisha, you, there's no difference. You could do something great. In fact, the weaker you think you are, I think probably even the better chance you have of doing something great. Because God will get more glory out of it. And you know, going through this process, the last reality, the sixth reality, is that the preparation time changes your perspective, your attitude. Verse 12 of 2 Kings 2, Elisha sees the chariot of fire, and he cries out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." Which is another way we would say, "Oh my word, I don't know what to say, I'm going to faint." Elisha sees him no more. He took hold of his own clothes and he tore them apart. He was not only amazed, but he was immediately aware of his sinful condition. And basically, you do that when you repent. But just at the sight of something so glorious, he's humbled. Here's a quote from Hans Urs von Balthasar in a book called Prayer. What you are is God's gift to you. What you become is your gift back to God. What you are is God's gift to you, but what you become is your gift back to God. So, if God's given you a promise, maybe it's time to find a mentor in that area and follow them. Who is your mentor? Do you have a mentor? Do you follow somebody? And then if you are someone that God's been using in great ways, who is going to be your next in line? You know, one of the jobs of a mentor is to, pretty early on, to leave. Let the mentoree down, quote unquote. I hate it when people that are my mentors leave. I still haven't gotten over, and I never will, I'm sure, Ty and Terry dying. I mean, they were hit instantly. They were killed instantly. Might as well have been a chariot of fire. They just immediately with Jesus, which is amazing, awesome. But now it just feels so alone. It's hard enough to leave this church, to leave Pastor Jim and all the staff that I feel in many ways, and some of you too, that have impacted our lives, not only my life, but Sylvie's, my wife. Wave over there, Sylvie. You've been like mentors to us, and it's hard to leave. You know, that's a hard thing to leave. I understand Elisha's pain. Now he's got to do it alone. But there's so many great things that are going to happen now because of that. You know, the great thing about Jesus and his promises, the great thing about how the kingdom of God works is that, you know, in the world you think if I follow this amazing person, if I could be half like them, that would be great. But guess what? In the kingdom, it's different. In the kingdom of God, your mentor, you could receive a double portion. And didn't Jesus say, hey guys, I have to leave, it's better if I go, because you guys, even greater things will you do if I go. So in the kingdom of God, you actually receive a double portion of anointing from your mentor, which doesn't seem fair. But it is, because we're not building our own thing, we're building God's thing, and that's the way his kingdom works. Ty and I and Terry and others, we inherited a blessing from that church that had been planted there for years and years before we came. And we just rode on the wave of blessing. And if you're faithful here, don't we want to see the next generation? Don't we want to see people coming into this place that because we've been faithful, they're just going to go way beyond anywhere we could go? That'd be awesome. That's what a real mentor dreams about. They don't dream about, how can everybody praise me? It's the opposite. It's how much greater can they be than me? See the difference?